Hey everybody, my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be the first video in a series of videos that's going to be sort of my complete React 2021 course. So this will basically show you React from beginning to end and some of the other sort of cool libraries. This isn't like everything A to Z, but definitely enough to be dangerous. And what is React? React is in a category of front-end libraries, so it's or frameworks, whichever you want to call it. That what it does, it allows you to create your front end. And again, when we say front end, I mean the part of your website that runs in the user's browser. Okay, it allows you to create your user experience, your user interface, in a way where the data of, aka the state or data that your application depends on, more easily is synced with what the user sees. Because without a framework like React or Angular or Vue or Svelte or Solid.js, one of these many frameworks, all of which I've done videos on, so you can check those out. But without those frameworks, what would happen is that you would have to describe or you'd have to construct your UI imperatively, which means step by step. So I'd have to sit there and say, okay, let me change the data. So this variable now equals this. Okay, well now I need to make sure that change reflects on the screen. So let me destroy this DOM node. Okay, and I'm assuming you know what the DOM is and JavaScript. If you do not know what JavaScript and the DOM is, you should probably do that first and watch my JavaScript DOM videos first. And if you don't know JavaScript, start there. Okay, and again, this is my website devnursery.com where you can find tutorials on all the things. So start there first. If you do not know JavaScript, if you do not understand the DOM, this is not where you should be starting. Okay? But bottom line is, again, without a framework, I would have to manipulate that DOM manually. So I'd have to like remove this h1 from the screen, then remove this div from the screen, then create a new div, and then edit the text in the div, and then mount that div onto the DOM. I'd have to do it step by step by step. Now with the framework, again, like the ones I've listed, like React. So again, React, where's React? It's in here somewhere. But you know, the basic frameworks like Svelte, Vue, Angular, React. There's also Solid.js. I'm not sure. Do I have Solid.js on this list? No, not at the moment. I need to add that. Okay. But without many of those frameworks, what happens with those frameworks, all I have to do is update the data. And then the framework will know how to update the relevant portions of my UI. And that's sort of like the beauty of it. That all I have to think about is sort of how data changes or how state changes in my application, and then the framework handles the updates to the UI. Secondary with these frameworks is that they are component based, which means I can define the building blocks of my website to their smallest pieces. So for example, like this website here, devnursery.com, is created with React. And it's like, see like these little cards here, that's a component. I didn't actually code each one of these cards. I coded one. I created a component that represents one card that has a certain sort of like fill in the blanks, like what should the picture be, what should the text be. I create these components and then I can use them over and over and over again, which then makes composing my website more easy, I guess. You can do a lot more a lot quicker once you kind of really get used to thinking in terms of components, little building blocks of your UI, and then also again no longer having to think about how you construct your UI, just thinking about sort of what your UI is and how the data relates to it, and letting the framework handle all the updates. So those are sort of the two primary benefits. There are other tertiary benefits depending on the framework, but you generally can use any of these frameworks to build a mobile app. So React has its own sort of mobile framework called React Native. For any of the other ones, you can use something called Native Script, which is a JavaScript framework for taking pretty much any JavaScript framework and turning it into a cross-platform mobile application. So you have that option. Okay, and then again, all of this stuff can then be wrapped in for a desktop app using Electron, which is a wrapper that allows you to create JavaScript applications, and then that would normally be for the web, and package them in as a desktop app. So if you ever use like Postman or VS Code or things like that, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. So a lot of desktop applications are built this way. I think like Discord and Slack are also built in this fashion. That's why like the experience in the web is very similar to the experience as a separate desktop application. So learning one of these frameworks is very powerful. And then again, you can really kind of port that ability to build an application to desktop or mobile. So you can generally do that with any of these frameworks. React probably has one of the more seamless experiences, the biggest community of all these frameworks, the largest amount of third-party libraries, and largest amount of users and most downloads every week. So this is why like all the heat is on React, like all the attention is on React. But they're all pretty cool. Okay, I definitely React. I don't think is currently like the fastest. So I think that would go to like Solid.js. I think currently would be like the fastest. It's not the easiest to learn. I would probably give that to Svelte, which would be like the second fastest, followed by Vue. But it's not hard to learn, and it is pretty fast. The big thing is that it's super popular, because there was a time where it was like the fastest and the easiest to learn, and a lot of people built a lot of really powerful websites, a lot of popular websites on it. So there's a huge demand for developers in React. So now that we've established sort of what is React and why do you care about React, let's start talking about how do you use React. So I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code as my code editor. Okay, so let me open up a new folder. So let me go. What I like to do is like I set up a development folder with all my sub repos. So I'm going to go to my teaching folder. I think I want to go to Scratch, video singles. And we're going to call this our React 2021 course. Okay, and I'm going to create a repository in here. Well, I'm going to create a React project. So from this folder in my Visual Studio Code, I'm going to open up my terminal. Now, I'm using Linux. So by the way, I'm using a Linux machine, which uses a bash terminal. Okay, so the commands may differ a little bit if you're on a Windows machine. If you're on a Mac, the commands should be generally the same, because Mac will also use bash or zush, which are the same thing. While Windows by default uses PowerShell, which has most of the same commands, but the Windows file system does intrinsically work differently than the Unix-based Mac and Linux. So just keep that in mind. But if you have some knowledge of using terminal or using bash, I do have videos on that. A good thing to know. But really, long as you have Node installed. So again, if you haven't installed Node, you want to install Node. Okay, nodejs.org. Usually I'd recommend you to download the latest version. At the moment, I noticed over the last few days that they just released Node 17 about a few weeks ago, and currently like the Create React app is having a little issues with that. So stick with 16 in the meantime. Okay, so stick with the long-term support in the meantime. Probably, depending on when you're watching this from when I created it, chances are they would have worked out that stuff and you can use 17. But 16 should have pretty much all the features at this point. There shouldn't be too much of a difference between the two. Cool. So what you do is you do npx. Npx is a node command. So again, you get this command because you installed Node. So if you don't install Node, you don't get this command. And then you can do create React app. And this is just one of many React project generators, but Create React App is specifically the one created by Facebook. So Facebook created Create React App. And it creates a really nice environment to do React apps with things like ESLint. Think of ESLint as like the JavaScript grammar check. Babel, which allows you to use cutting-edge JavaScript and translate it to older, more browser-compliant JavaScript. And Webpack, which takes all your code and bundles it into your final product that you ship to the client. And that's all done for you. You don't have to worry about setting up any of that stuff. Okay, there are other templates out there, and maybe in a future video we'll talk about some of those. But yeah, npx create React app. Okay, and we'll just say React 2021, because I'll do all my lessons in this one repo. And I do have another resource to be aware of. So there's my blog, tuts.alexmercedcoder.com. And if you search here, I have like an ultimate React guide. I also have it published on dev.to. Okay, but let me just find that particular, I think here it is, Ultimate 2021 reference for React functional components. Okay, the most up-to-date thing is this gist. So at the very top of this article, I link to the gist that I have, and I continuously update this with more and more stuff about React. So if you wanted to read up on some of these features that I'm going to cover over the next several videos, this is a good place to cover that. Okay, and everything you'd kind of want to know, and then some. Okay, it's just so you're aware that that resource is out there. And do follow me on GitHub or on LinkedIn. And also, if you really want to message me directly, the best place to do it is by joining either the Slack or Discord community here at Dev Nursery. You'll have direct access to me. You can message me with like video recommendations that you'd like me to make, or just ask me a question. I'm pretty responsive. I have Discord and Slack open on my desktop all day. So join these communities, and you can meet some other developers and people who I've crossed paths with over the years. So not a bad place to be. Okay, cool. So this should be done generating. So now that this is done generating, what I want to do is cd change directories into that folder, React 2021. Now, in order to start the project, to start the server, what you do is you'll type in a command called npm start. Now, whenever you're looking at a Node project, because this is essentially, we're working in Node at the moment, you always can look at this package.json file to see what commands it has under this section called scripts. Right here. So we have a start command. That's going to be for us to run our server when we're developing. Build is going to be used to build the final output, the thing we actually ship and deploy. Usually, whoever you're deploying with, if you're using like a Netlify or Vercel, will run that command automatically for you, so not something you have to worry about. Test will be if we write React tests. I have a video on that. I don't know if I'll cover that during this course, but a good thing to know. Writing tests is very important. Helps you write more disciplined code and think more critically about how you write your code. And eject, remember how I mentioned that there's all these like ESLint and Webpack and Babel. If you really wanted like to see those settings and like be able to play around with them, you would run this eject command, and it would do an irreversible releasing of all these scripts, so you can see them and edit them and do whatever with them. I would say that unless you get really familiar with those kind of tools. Okay. But if I do npm start, to do the other commands would be like npm run build, npm run test, npm run eject. The only exception to this is start. Start's the only one you can use without the word run. So I would do npm start, and this is going to run the server, which will open it up in the browser. And if at any time I want to shut down this server, I just go over here to my terminal and I'll hit Control-C. And Control-C will shut off my server. So there, it closes off my server right there in the terminal. But if I want to turn it back on, again, I can just type in npm start. Okay, well and good. Cool. So here we are. Okay, and this is like the default React screen. So let's just talk a little bit about like how this screen and kind of what's going on here. If I look inside this public folder, this is where we'll find our index.html. So if you've done some front-end development without a framework, generally your index.html is like where everything kind of starts and is sort of the main page. But if we look at it, there's not much going on here. Literally the whole page is this div right here. Okay, it's just this div with an ID of root. And there's a reason for that, and you'll see this in all the frameworks. So whether you're using like Svelte, Vue, Angular, Solid.js, React, you're going to see this pattern where there's a div on the page. And then if we go to this beginning of our JavaScript, which is this index.js, it's always sort of like the entry point. Sometimes you'll see it called like main.js, but it's always one of these types of words. But if I go in here, I'm going to see that there's this function called React DOM.render. And what this function is doing is saying, I'm going to inject this stuff here, and these are components. And I'll talk more about this syntax in a second, because it looks a lot like HTML in my JavaScript, right? Kind of weird. But what it's doing, it's saying, wherever the div with the ID of root is, inject this. And that's pretty much what happens. Because what happens is that React is creating your UI via your JavaScript. So essentially, instead of writing a bunch of HTML, you're theoretically really writing a bunch of JavaScript that constructs the UI programmatically. But writing a lot of JavaScript, if you've ever done like DOM manipulation, which you should have if you're watching this video. Okay, so again, so this syntax is referred to as JSX. So just to recap, because I kind of had a little pause there. You're writing your code essentially in JavaScript, but that would be really painful to write your code in JavaScript. So what Facebook did is they created this syntax for writing your JavaScript. You're really, again, writing calls that create DOM nodes and do all that JavaScript DOM stuff, but you're writing it in the syntax that looks like HTML. But it isn't. It's not. You're not writing an HTML file that's being interpreted as HTML. You're actually writing this syntax that gets turned into a bunch of calls of a function called react.createElement, which again, you don't need to know how that function works. You just need to know that this is happening. That this is looks like JavaScript. I mean, it looks like HTML, but it's really JavaScript. And it's referred to as JSX, which stands for like JavaScript XML, which I prefer JavaScript extended, but whatever. all we know is that it's awesome. Okay, so you can write like HTML, but in your JavaScript. Okay, now the reason why this is possible is because of Babel. Facebook created a special Babel plugin. Again, Babel translates your JavaScript code to like older JavaScript that translate these JSX in your code and translate into just normal JavaScript that can be read by a browser. Okay, so we'll write it in JSX and we don't have to worry about it being translated. All that's being done for us. So essentially what this is, so when you see like this is what's referred to as a component. It's like a building block of your application. And all it really is, like anything for you to be able to use this syntax, you just have to write a function. Okay? Like I'll just show you an example right here. I'll just write a quick function. Const example. And you have to, but it has to be uppercase because components are uppercase, so that way you don't collide with the name of a HTML tag. But let's just say I did this, equals and a function that returns an h1 that says hello. Okay, so it should stop complaining. So see, this is a function. So this is how you write a component, and all a component is a function that returns JSX. So it's just those two things have to be true. Is it a function? Does that function return JSX or null? It could also return null if you don't want it to show anything. But if one of those two things are true, then I can now go into other JSX expressions like this one and use it like so. And now I should see hello somewhere. So let's see, do I see hello somewhere? Go back. Refresh. Oh wait, there we go. I see the bar over here. And see, there's the hello. That's your example component. So see, everything above here, this is all the app component, which we're gonna go take a look at in a second. And then here we have my example component. So that's all a component is. At the end of the day, just bringing all the stuff over here. Having multiple screens, not my friend today. Okay, but that's it. So that's all a component is. Now, usually we don't write multiple components in one file because we like to organize our code. So I'm going to delete this example component. This was just to show you that literally anytime you write a function that returns JSX, you can use this sort of component syntax, this JSX syntax. Okay. Now, what if this was just a variable? Because I could also store JSX inside of a variable. What if it was just a variable? Okay, so this is variable equals the h1. I could then use curly brackets to inject it. So I can just say example. And I would end up having the same effect. So the curly brackets, if you ever use like a templating library, like a handlebars, a pug, EJS, whatnot, there's always like some sort of syntax for you to sort of escape the HTML and then sit there and write like template syntax. That's what this is. It just allows you to inject things. Any valid JavaScript extension can go inside this curly bracket. So I could put like 2 + 2, and then that would generate like 4. So see, like there's 4 right down there. Okay, so that's just like how you write JSX. But usually you don't write any JSX here. Usually you just leave this injection of the app component alone. So we're injecting the app component here, and really your app component becomes your whole website. That's why it's called app, because it's the whole application. So now we go to our app.js, where our app component is defined. And see, if you look at this very carefully, it's just a function, and then this function returns JSX. That's all it is. Okay, that is literally all a component is. So you just think of the building blocks that are your part of your website, and you just build them out as different components. So usually the first thing you do with a React app is you're just going to empty out this div here, so that way you get a blank page. Okay, let me just refresh. And see, it's a blank page because I deleted everything in the JSX. And by default, it comes with a couple CSS files. There's this index.css file that's attached to your index.js. It doesn't really matter which one of these CSS files you write in, and you can create more. Long as the CSS file is imported somewhere, it will be available. It's a global CSS. So by default, the CSS in React is not scoped What scoped means is that that CSS will only work for the file that you imported in, so that CSS will not style things in other components. You can do that. There's a lot of different ways to style React. If you're just starting out with React, the easiest thing to do is just treat this index.css file as your global CSS file and get used to that first. And typically what's done is that each component, the wrapper, there's always like one element that's the wrapper of everything for that component. So it could be a div. You can't have two top level components, so I can't do this. I'm gonna get an error. See right here, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped. There can only be one thing that encloses everything. If I did need to have two, like for some reason I really just wanted to have two things there, I could use what's called a fragment, and then that would work. Okay. And that would work. So I could wrap it in fragments like so. Okay. That's one way. You could also make it an array. That's actually technically what this is doing under the hood is that it's parsing our JSX and actually turning it into an array of JSX expressions, which is also a valid return value. So I could do this. I could do an array and then just say here's the first div and then do comma, here's the second div. That's technically what the fragment is doing. It's just basically converting the JSX into an array of JSX elements. But just so you're aware, you can render an array of JSX, and that's an important point for later. Okay, but really most of the time the easiest thing to do is just create an element, div, and then usually when to give the class, and the thing about JSX, since you're in JavaScript, you can't use the word class because it's already a word in JavaScript. So instead we're going to use class name, and you usually just give it the name of the component. This way it's pretty easy to style because you can style everything relative to that component's top level class, and that becomes pretty easy to organize your CSS. Cool. So that's that. Okay, but then what I can do is usually you would do is you would create a folder called components, and here's where we'll put all our other building blocks. So let's say I decide to think about your normal structure of a website. You have your header, then you have your footer, and then the middle we'll call it like the main area of the website. So we start, creating our building blocks from there. So I'll sit there and say, okay, new file, we'll have header.js, new file, main.js, and then footer.js. And we can just start composing our website with different sections. So and again, all it is, I gotta create a function. So we'll call the function, call it header, and that function should just return JSX. So I'll just start off with we'll say it's a header tag, and then here we'll just say header, just for now. Okay, and then we just export the function, export default the function, and there's a component. That's it. That's all I have to do. In each file, I create a function that returns JSX, I export it, and now I can use it in the other places. But first I'll just kind of make sure these other two files have what they need. So just do a quick setup here, make that footer, then change this to a footer tag. Okay, and then head over to main and then create a main component. Main. And there we go. We got our 3 components. I can then import them. I'm usually going to get rid of this logo. We don't need this logo anymore. And I'm not going to use the app.css, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to say header. Okay. And then I'm going to import footer. Okay. Why is it lowercase? Did I call it lowercase by accident? Oops, I said import footer. There we go. So this should be boop. Change that to F. And then import main from main. So I've imported these components. Now I'm allowed to use them. So I can be like header main footer. So you see how we're composing our page as building blocks. So my whole application is really this app component. But inside this app component, there's header, main, and footer. And what shows up for header is defined inside the header component, and so forth. So I can create like little buttons. You know, you just think about like how many ways you can slice up each part of your website, and then how much you can slice up that slice, and you compose your website into these small pieces, because a button may be really reusable. And I mean, think about like Facebook. How many things like the like button are used over and over again on the website? That's perfect to be its own individual component that can then be reused over and over and over again throughout the website. So that's the beauty sort of like component-based design. And again, these components can be reused multiple times. So for example, let's say I create a button component, new file, button.js. So let's make a button. Button. And we'll make this a button. And I can do that. And then now I can import this button component. Let me just make sure that I did default export it. Okay. So there's the button. And I can use the button several times. So see, there's one button. And now I see 3 buttons. Now that's all fine and good. Here's the problem though. This button is exactly the same every time. What if I wanted like to customize it? Like first I could style it. So, you know, again, I could style it actually inside the component. So I could do something like this, what's called inline styling. So I could use a CSS, I could use a CSS file, but I could also do an inline style. I could do equals, and then what I do is I do style equals, and I do a curly bracket, which means I'm escaping. Because again, just like templating languages, yet there's always an escape symbol. This is the curly brackets, meaning I want to do some JavaScript. And what I want to pass it is a JavaScript object. And this is a lot like the style object in DOM nodes. If you've done DOM manipulation, all the properties are going to be camel case. So if I want to do like background color, we'll say like blue. I can pass as a string. Blue. Padding. Say is like 10 pixels, and actually not semicolons but commas, comma. Okay, the color of the font we'll say is 1.5 EMs. Okay, the font weight, and notice again everything is camel case, not kebab case like in CSS. Font weight, we'll say 900. Okay. Oh, this is supposed to be color, so this should be white. And then we'll do font size 1.5 EMs. And you see like all these buttons are now styled, but they all say the same thing. They all do the same thing. I want to customize those buttons, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next video. So now you know how to make components. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Git repo automatically gets created when you generate a create React app. So that happens automatically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit. So I'm just going to do a git add dot git commit dash m. Okay, video 1. And then what I'm going to do is going forward is I'm going to make a branch for each video so you can see what the code looks like at the end of each video. So for the next video, I'm going to do git checkout, git checkout dash m, git checkout, not git checkout, no quotation marks, git checkout m, props. Props will be the topic of the next video. Although I did that wrong, it's dash b. There we go, I'm switched over to the props branch. But otherwise, I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great day and enjoy.